Hi everyone. This is the third part of a 15-part series. It's dedicated to Nicette and to her VBAC education project. So Nicette and I are old women. But before I really get into the nitty-gritty of this conversation today, now we have the opportunity to talk globally. What I'd like each of you to do is to go back to the mothers of the grandmothers of my generation. These are women who birthed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And ask them, what was the societal expectation of their culture or their community about preparing for birth? It's important for you to know that because our NGO is in New Zealand, and women who birthed during my age in 1970, if we had normal low-risk pregnancies, we could get a prescription from a doctor to attend a Grantley Dick Reed natural childbirth class, which was full of skills, and they also gave lots of information. So everybody else was excluded from that possibility. So Grantley Dick Reed focused on childbirth without fear, and it was focused on these narrow goals of a natural birth, pain-free labor, with no medical intervention. In the United States, where I gave birth, there was a very high societal expectation across all 50 states, which is quite remarkable, for about a 25-year period, that all expectant families take the first ever childbirth preparation classes, which were Lamaze, and some people paid for Bradley methods. Both of these were skills-based. So Canada, I don't know about. Australia, I don't know about. No other country do I really know about except the United States and New Zealand. So you go back and ask, what did your grandmother or your mother do? What was their expectation in preparing for birth? Just ask them that question. So for my generation in the United States, that meant that when our sons and daughters were older, we told them to learn skills to birth their baby. However, by 1982, when I had my youngest child, almost all the skills-based classes were gone. Childbirth preparation was now all about information and about making choices. And that has changed society profoundly. From the 50s to the 70s, multiple millions of women in the United States across all 50 states went into hospitals when their partners were permitted to come into them as well and use some form of skills, which meant that all the staff and all the obstetricians saw that generation of women coping, managing better, staying on top of and feeling more in control than they had seen the previous generation of the post-World War II, or people who birthed from the 30s to the 50s. So there was a profound change when there was a societal expectation that all of us become skilled. We use skills, whether they worked or not, in every type of birth that we had as long as we were conscious. This was unique probably around the world because those three obstetricians, Lamaze, Grantley Dick Reed, and Bradley, were really focused on natural birth, pain-free labor, with no medical interventions. But that excludes too many people. So the Birthing Better skills started to develop in the early 1970s. I worked with hundreds of mothers and fathers, and we developed a broader, more complete skills-based approach to all births, because the families I worked with were pregnant with their baby, and they wanted to use skills to birth their baby. And because we were starting in the 70s, there was still a societal expectation that we learn skills. And because the cesarean rate was 4.5%, for the 10 years that we focused on developing the first phase of these skills, we focused on how to cope better, manage better, handle better, deal with better, work through better, stay on top better, and feel more in control better. And we did that by refining breathing skills, by refining nonverbal and verbal communication skills so that we were effective, and developing a type of touch that was sustainable and adaptable and had the purpose of cueing women to soften inside their bodies. However, many of us had long labors, as mentioned before. So as the cesarean rate increased, because women didn't want to be left with a scar, we were wearing bikinis, doctors came up with a bikini cut, diagnostic tools became easier, the risks that had been part of labor previous to that, because 4.5 cesarean rate doesn't mean that 95.5% of women have safe births, or that they manage birth well, or that they get through labor quickly. It means that the medical profession didn't have tools to deal with things like Rh negative. RhoGAM was developed in my lifetime. Rubella, babies died of rubella. Premature babies, they died. BREECH babies, some died. Twins, some were locked and they died. But it wasn't just death, it was injury. Things like bleeding or tearing or you name it, there's so many possibilities. So as the medical profession became more sophisticated, it started to want to reduce those problems because modern women didn't want those problems to be left unattended. We didn't want our children to die of measles. That's why vaccinations. We didn't want to die of infections. That's why immunizations and antibiotics. So we, as modern people, have asked our medical profession to meet our needs to reduce death and injury. Good or bad, that's just the reality of it. So right now, you are pregnant, and you need to know what the message came through to you from your mother or your grandmother. Were you told to learn skills, or told there's nothing you can do about birth, there's no way to know what it's going to be like? But now we have an opportunity to make a change. And the change we want you to be involved in, and our New Zealand NGO has promoted for 50 years, is that we need to grow a skilled birthing population. Yes, it can work alongside choices, and we know that choices are very fickle. We don't always have choices. The choices we chose, we didn't always like. The choices changed a lot. However, skills are what you use as you're doing in an activity, and you will always do the activity of birthing your baby, no matter where it is, who's present, what happens to and around you, or your sensations, or your mental experience of it. So when we use skills, as we did in the United States in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was across the board, all 50 states, millions and millions and millions of families learned skills. Yes, we went to classes, which most people don't do nowadays, but instead we're online, we're in bookstores, we're in libraries. So what we're saying to you in this part of this series is that you are significant. If you learn skills and use skills to birth your baby, you may or may not have a natural birth. You may or may not have a pain-free birth. You may or may not have medical assessments, monitoring procedures that are now all lumped into one word called interventions. However, you will have skills, and when you have skills, you will birth better. And you will look back on that experience with pride, just as my generation of women and men in the United States did, because there was a very high societal expectation that all of us become skilled. And what does this mean? You're going to have a son or a daughter. You may have 20 of them. If you, as a mother, say to your sons and daughter, when you become pregnant, it is normal and natural for you to learn birth and birth coaching skills and to use them throughout the activity of birthing my grandchildren, your sons and daughters. You will do better. You will birth better. You will feel better. You will cope better. You will manage. You will deal with. You'll work through. You'll stay on top of it and you feel in control no matter the circumstance. If you learn skills, you will tell the next generation. Same way, if you don't learn skills, you will not tell them. Right? And if you don't tell them, just as the break occurred after my generation, because the next group of birth advocates in the 70s and 80s said skills do not achieve those three narrow goals. So let's get rid of skills because birth is just the most natural thing in the world. Let's just have women be able to say no to medical care. A lot of women don't want to say no to medical care. They're modern women. They distinguish themselves in a modern society by having refrigeration and electricity and medical care. So we are risk averse as modern people. We do not want to go back to the village hut where there is no help if we have risks. Now, if you're having a VBAC, that meant you had a cesarean. Did you go into birth with skills? If you didn't, did you have what you would consider to be a unnecessary, non-medical cesarean? Or was it such a medical issue for your health or well-being or your baby's health or well-being that you are absolutely thrilled you lived in a modern country where you could have a safe surgical birth? Pros and cons of it for sure. But imagine if you really had a medical issue if it wasn't there. So when you had your first cesarean, the chances are, the people that I'm talking to, the people who you are, you did not go into birth with a set of skills that were adaptable, adjustable, and sustainable because you were not told to by your mother or your grandmother. Because unless you were talking to people my generation, they wouldn't have told you. And even people of my generation who said to you, learn skills, you probably couldn't find Lamaze classes or Bradley classes anymore. So it got broken back then. It got broken because skills were just narrow, and then it got broken because skills were pushed away and replaced by choices. But what happened when cesareans became safer, when we all started wearing bikinis and didn't want to have a scar on our belly, and doctors came up with a bikini cut, and it became safer to have a trial of labor, what happened is that skills were disappearing because the birth advocates were advocating for choice. So it's the same time the medical profession in the United States had seen millions of us being skilled and started to lighten up and begin to change the evidence-based practice and give us the ability to have a trial of labor, which then became a vaginal birth after a cesarean, we as consumers of that service stopped being skilled. So we've crossed over. The medical profession during the 50s, 60s, and 70s never believed that the skills that Lamaze and Bradley were teaching were going to produce more natural birth, pain-free labor without medical intervention, and they were accurate. However, if the original goal had been for women to cope and manage, deal with, work through, stay on top of, feel in control, the medical profession was seeing that. And if that had been the goal, we would have all seen it together and we would have all come together around that. But we didn't. It got separated from natural birth into medical. This has been a huge mistake. So you now are faced with the fact that you have not been told to become skilled. Fortunately, there are more skills-based resources out there. There's hypnobirthing, hypnobabies, ComBirth, Birthing Within, Lamaze, Bradley, Grantley Dick Reed, and our resource, Birthing Better, which was known as the Pink Kit. So you have choices about what skills-based method you use. You can use more than one. You just want to start somewhere around 24 weeks. And why is this important? Because when we go back and we look at why has the cesarean rate risen, it has risen because we lack skills. It's as simple as that. The skills that we developed as Birthing Better, we coped better, but many of us still had long first and second stages. And when it became easier to do a cesarean, we were the ones who had more medical interventions. Those of us who had breech babies, there are risks involved in it. Same with multiples. So when it became safer to do a cesarean, if we struggled at birth, the doctors were more likely to do a cesarean than have us risk the health and well-being of our babies. And we appreciated that for a while. Now we're questioning it. We're saying to them, we don't want so many cesareans. But what are we doing? We're just saying we don't want that. But we need to become skilled, and it's essential we become skilled. So what Birthing Better families did in the second part of the 70s and the 80s, as the cesarean rate began to rise, is we began to say, how can we prevent those long first and second stages? How can we reduce the risks to our breech babies or our multiples, or any other problem we had. And what we learned was we had to prepare our pregnant body for birth. We had to learn to create space inside our body to let this big object out. And what's sad in all of this, because I've lived through this, I've birthed through all of this, is that when I was taking Lamaze classes in the 1970s, do you know what women told each other? Do pelvic floor exercises so that you strengthen your muscles for birth, so you have strong muscles to push your baby out. And that is so inaccurate. It's embarrassing to be a woman to hear that said to other women. Tighten up down there now. This is coming out of you. If you tighten up, does that hinder or help that? Well, common sense says it hinders it. So it's important that you understand that we as women give each other incorrect information to prepare for birth. So we need skills that work very effectively. Are pelvic floor exercises wrong? No, of course not. Just don't do them from 24 weeks of pregnancy until after you've had your baby. It's between pregnancies you need to do them. And then you'll have a strong pelvic floor when you get pregnant again. So it's important to understand that if we're going to achieve and have more successful VBACs, we need to reduce how many cesareans we have to begin with. And that comes through growing a skilled birthing population and women who effectively birth their baby without having these long, drawn-out births. Because there are two issues when it comes to childbirth, from our viewpoint and from the healthcare system. Issues that become problems or risks, and suffering. Nobody wants women to suffer. So when we go into birth without skills and we moan and groan, and we do that for hours, and we do that for days, and we don't sleep, and we're tired and we're exhausted, we are more likely to have medical interventions. And to reduce that, we have to cope and manage better. We have to reduce our own suffering, and we do that by becoming skilled. Now, it's very interesting, the terminology, because we were the first generation of women who had had classical cesareans who wanted to give birth vaginally. And it was called a trial of labor. And the natural birth movement said, women aren't on trial. And our response as Birthing Better Families is, yes, we are. Right? We have to get through the hard work of labor. Cesareans are performed in that part of birth. Rarely are they performed in second stage. Now, a little bit more than they were, because people aren't using forceps anymore, because the natural birth movement recognized there were some risks, and so everybody stopped using forceps. So now they're pushing babies back up to do cesareans. So be careful what you wish for. So when we want to have a choice-based system, more women are going to choose elective cesareans because we lack skills. So when we say to each other, we want a VBAC, a vaginal birth after cesarean, and you hear women talk about how they missed the vaginal birth, we have to get through the hard work of labor. It's as simple as that. If we cannot open up our body to let this object out, we will not have a vaginal birth. But the vaginal part of the birth is so much shorter compared to the hard work of getting the baby down through and out our body. And it is our responsibility to help our baby do that. And we do that best when we are skilled. So I'm coming to the end of part 3 now. So the takeaway is you become skilled. Have it become something that's just natural and normal, that when you're pregnant you become skilled. Use your skills during your baby's birth, no matter how. Even on the way to the hospital, being prepped and in surgery, it's your baby's birth, for goodness sakes. Pass on to your sons and daughter. Become skilled when you birth your baby. Tell your friends to do the same thing. Share this video with others. Let's change the childbirth conversation. Let's grow a skilled birthing population globally now. And let's develop increasingly better and better skills so that we all birth better. Thanks for listening. And Nicette, thank you for your wonderful VBAC education project.